All right.
Yeah, I'm doing a presentation.
All right, stand by. We're going to get out of presentation mode.
Just go to duplicate slideshow.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we're recording. Fantastic. Okay, back to Beth. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sorry that you were unable to hear on the WebEx. I mainly have just gone through the introduction slides, so we will just... Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through my research questions. I'll circle back to these after I go through some background, talk about what working memory is, those type of things. So I started out asking questions like, does working memory impact question order and response order effects? And assuming that it does, would this impact of working memory be consistent across different modes of survey administration, so in particular across telephone and web surveys? Will the impact of working memory be consistent across respondents of all ages? Then I also wanted to look at how measures that were designed specifically to capture working memory would compare to the measures that are currently being used on the health and retirement study. A little bit of background on the cognitive psychology research on working memory. So what is working memory? Working memory is a system involving two different components. It involves both a storage component and a processing component where individuals are continuing to engage in some kind of cognitive processing. So there's some different theories. One is there's three components: the central executive, the phonological loop, and the visuospatial sketchpad, where the central executive acts as kind of a hub processor for us. The phonological loop is what helps us process incoming verbal information, and the visuospatial sketchpad is what helps us processing visual information. Our theory looks at working memory as being an activation-based pool of resources, where there's only so many resources available for these two components. As we begin using resources for one of the components, either the storage or the processing, there become fewer resources available for the other one. And we all have this kind of maximum capacity, which differs individual to individual. But if maximum capacity is exceeded, then our performance will start to decline in either one or both of these different components. So as working memory measured, I'll talk about some of the more common ones that are in the literature. There's many more in addition to these. One of the early ones is referred to in different ways, either the reading, listening, or sentence scan. This can be administered either verbally or visually, where individuals are presented with some kind of statement. They need to engage in some type of processing. Often this will ask them to state whether this statement is true or false, to engage the processing. After a set of them, then they have to recall either the last word of the statement, different ones may be given unrelated word or maybe a number to revert. Alphabet scan is where individuals are presented with a list of words. They have rearranged them mentally in alphabetical order and then present them back. A subtract 2 scan where respondents are presented numeric values where they have to subtract 2 before repeating back the numbers. And then also some different type of operation or computation scans where maybe individuals are presented with some simple math equation, have to say whether that statement is true or false. So 2 plus 2 equals 5. They would have to say that that is false. Maybe they're going to be given a list of these and have to either repeat back the number that's on the right-hand side, or sometimes there's words that are presented after that they have to remember and repeat back. At Georgia Tech, they do have an attention and working memory lab under the direction of Engel, where they have automated some of these processes that can be used. So working memory is highly related to other cognitive constructs, although it has been shown to be a separate construct from them, such as short-term memory, fluid intelligence, and language comprehension and processing. Unfortunately for all of us, there are some aging effects with working memory. Different studies have shown there to be differences, age differences. There's a significant negative correlation between age and working memory capacity. Older individuals typically have fewer resources available. They reach that maximum capacity earlier. We experience a decline of processing speed, and these age effects are more prominent the more complex the tasks become. I'll switch gears now and talk a little bit about some different context effects from the survey methodology standpoint. So response order effects, previous research has shown that the order in which response options are presented can have an effect on which response option is selected. So the two main ones are primacy effects, where earlier response options tend to be selected, recency effects, where the later response options are selected. These can be impacted by the amount of attention or the amount of cognitive processing that a respondent extends to these response options. They do become more prominent in respondents with a lower cognitive ability. And a couple of different studies have shown that these response option effects actually can occur with as few as only 2 response options. Question order effects. This is the presence of an entire question can impact the response on a later, usually related question. The main effects here are consistency, or sometimes referred to as assimilation effects. This is respondents tend to include information from an earlier question in that later question, kind of tending for those responses to become more like one another because they're using the same information. So for the context effects, this can come in a couple of different varieties, where maybe respondents exclude information that they used on an earlier question when they're answering a later question. Or there may be this comparison-based context effect, where the first question maybe establishes some kind of baseline, and therefore they kind of make their judgment on the second question based on the kind of baseline that they established with the first question. And these contrast effects typically are requiring more cognitive effort when respondents show these effects. What we expect here, as far as it impacting respondents, is that those respondents with higher working memory or better memory are going to be able to recall what they did on a first question. They're going to be able to recall that first question, the information they retrieved for it. And so we expect that these contrast effects are going to happen more with people with a higher cognitive ability or better working memory capacity. When we look at some different mode effects and how different survey mode administrations impact context effects, respondents are engaging in different sensory channels depending on if it's an interviewer administered, where it might be a verbal survey and they're having to process information verbally, versus self-administered survey such as on the web or maybe paper, where they're processing things visually. Those can impact response order effects, is that the primacy effects are more prominent in self-administered. So when you're reading a list of response options, you're more likely to select an early response option compared to late ones. And there have been eye-tracking studies that have confirmed that respondents spend more information on those earlier options. Recency effects are more prominent in those interviewer-administered surveys, where respondents are more likely to select one of the later options that they heard. In questioner effects, these different modes can affect the order in which the questions are read, as well as the speed of the progressing through the survey. So in self-administered, respondents may not read questions in the order in which the researcher wants them to read it, especially if it's a paper survey. They might flip back and forth. They might read questions in different orders. On the web, researchers can have a little bit more control if they prevent them from going back to earlier questions, or respondents just might not take the effort to go back and flip through questions. As far as the speed, interviewers are typically going to set a faster pace on the interviewer-administered survey to keep that kind of conversation going, keep response going through the survey. Whereas self-administered, they can kind of take all the time that they want to do those. Some research by Knopf and colleagues have started to look at the effects of working memory. In 1994, they looked at complex questions that asked respondents if they had ever experienced any depressive symptoms over their entire life period. They selected any of these symptoms. They then had to say whether it was attributed to some kind of physical ailment or illness. The researchers found that the low working memory respondents were more likely to say that those depressive symptoms were caused by some kind of physical cause, maybe an ailment, an injury, or an illness, compared to those that had a higher working memory. So kind of jumping into the study, I was interested in looking at whether these findings would generalize to maybe more simple questions of attitude as compared to the complex series of questions that were used in the study. In 2007, there was a study that did look at question order effects in these three different groups. All the younger respondents, 19 to 40, were put into one group. The older adults between the ages of 60 to 100 were divided based on their working memory into low and high working memory. And so the effects were present for those younger respondents and the older adults with a higher working memory. So I mentioned in question order effects, we do expect these to be ones that are happening with respondents with a higher cognitive ability. Those effects were attenuated for that group that were the older respondents with the low working memory capacity. Jumping to this, I wanted to see what are the effects with younger adults that maybe have a varying degree of working memory, as well as including adults in that middle age group. So this study did not include any adults between 40 and 60. In 1999, Knopf looked at a meta-analysis of response order effects. Here, she used age as a proxy for working memory. Found that response order effects were more prominent among the older adults, and theorized that some of these effects might be attributed to working memory. So what I wanted to do was with this, actually testing the working memory and pulling that in to see are we still getting the response order effects if we use working memory as opposed to using age as a proxy. And the study, while not looking directly at working memory, did look at the data quality that impacted by the interaction of question difficulty and cognitive ability. The data is used from the AHEAD survey, which has since been merged with the health and retirement study. The memory measures that they used in this study were an immediate recall of 10 words, counting backwards from 20, asking respondents the day of the week, the current U.S. president, and then called the serial 7s task, where they ask respondents to subtract 7 from 100, and then they keep asking them to subtract 7 for 5 iterations. What I wanted to know is whether these results would extend working memory. The measures that are used in HRS, are reflecting respondents' working memory, or is it kind of reflecting maybe a different memory construct? I'll look back through these research questions again. This is a reminder. So my dissertation looks at, does working memory impact question order and response order effects? Is this impact on these effects consistent across the telephone and web? Is it consistent for respondents of all ages? And then working memory measures compared to those measures from the health and retirement study. The data that was collected, I ended up with an analytical sample size of 601 respondents, 301 of those on the telephone. 260 on the web. So we sent out recruitment letters to 3,700 Nebraska residents. They were randomly assigned to telephone or web prior to their first contact. So randomly assign them rather than allowing them to select the mode. And the data was collected this past year, November through January of this year. Lots of different questions that were included in this survey. I included a series of questions to look specifically at the response order effects. These asked respondents their preferences on a variety of entertainment topics. I included these questions to be salient across a wide variety of demographics. It was administered right after the election. I wanted to have questions that would maybe be more engaging and not off-putting if respondents were concerned that maybe they were politically motivated, things like that. There were 6 different versions that were used to randomize the response options. So in 3 of these questions, I included only 2 response options, and the order of those were rotated on the even and odd versions. And there were 3 questions with 6 response options that have a longer list. The Latin square design is a way to try to counterbalance those options. So as an example, one of the questions of following which type of book do you prefer to read, fiction or nonfiction? Half would receive it in this order, the other half it would have nonfiction or fiction. The questions that were used for question order effects are some questions that had previously been used by Schumann and Presser, as well as Knopper, that had found some different question order effects. So there were 3 pairs. One asked about happiness overall, with a question that asked about happiness with an intimate partner. The question was originally used as happiness within a marriage, so I updated it to an intimate partner to have a lower non-response questions. Labor conditions questions asked respondents about whether workers have the right to strike, if working conditions don't suit them, versus businessmen have a right to shut down. A question about legal abortion for a married woman who does not want any more children, and a question about the legal abortion when there's a chance a baby has a serious birth defect. Questions were included to measure working memory, and so one of the measures that I used was a sentence span. Respondents were provided a statement. They had to say whether the statement was true or false, and at the